Hello! Today I'm going to talk about how to find the right size and how to measure up when you're making a sewing pattern. This has really been inspired by a few people that have contacted me recently saying that they would like to make clothing but they're worried about finding the right size and how to measure up. So with that in mind, I thought I'd just share a couple of other tips which I think might be quite useful. So to start with, I like to kind of break down the making of a garment into two categories. You've got following the pattern and the construction, and then you've got the fitting. So if you can focus on the construction to start with and get used to making garments and then sort of move towards fitting, it just breaks it down a little bit. So if you can go for something that's quite unstructured, like a loose style, I think that's a good starting point. So I've got a couple of examples to show you. This is a simple top pattern that I found, and you can see it's very loose fitting, loose sleeves. There's a good chance there's not too much to worry about on the fit as long as you're in the right sort of ballpark on that one. Again, this is a similar type of thing, a very loose fitting kimono. That should be pretty good to start with. And the other one that is, it does involve fitting correctly over the waist, but there's minimal amounts of measurements really with the skirt, so that's another quite good starting point. The next thing that I want to say about commercial patterns and independent patterns as well, quite often they are categorised into easy, medium and advanced, but I kind of think that sometimes is a bit misleading, and this is a good case in point. This is a Vogue pattern which is described as easy, and I can see that the construction is quite easy, but as you can see it's got quite a fitted bodice, so unless you happen to be a standard size and the size that this pattern was designed for, you probably are going to have quite a bit of fitting to do around the bodice. So I would really move that into a slightly more advanced category really. So the next thing that I want to mention is shop sizes, and this is something that's another quite confusing thing. I think with sewing patterns, especially the commercial patterns, the sizing was created a long time ago when people were perhaps smaller body sizes. Therefore the sizing on commercial patterns is often quite small. Indie patterns, I think we've all kind of adopted our own size charts, so you know it's not like a one size fits all. When you pick out a pattern, you can't just say, well, I'm a size 16 in the shop, so I'm just going to be a size 16 in all these patterns, because that won't be the case. It is really important to do the measuring and check where you fit on the size chart. And like I said, commercial patterns on the whole tend to be really quite small. So you might be a size 16 in the shops. For example, this size 16 bust measurement is 38 inches and the waist is 30 inches and the hip is 40 inches. In a shop, you know, that might be more like a 14. So you kind of have to really look at the sizing before you start making, and just kind of look at the numbers and not the actual size, because it can be a bit disheartening to have to make something a fair bit bigger. So I'm going to move on to talking about the size charts that are inside a pattern. So this is, you'll have two size charts, so one with body measurements and one with garment measurements. So let's start with the body measurements one. This is the actual measurements of your body. So like I said, disregard anything you think you might be in a shop size, and let's just focus on the actual measurements. So let's measure my glamorous assistant here. So to start with, we're going to measure the bust. So she measures 35 inches, and I'm making sure that the tape measure is parallel around the body like that. To get a true measurement, you don't want something like that happening. You want to make sure it's nice and flat. Pull it snugly but not over tight. You want to be realistic about the measurements, and also not too loose. Don't just sort of have it there. And then we're going to do the smallest part of the waist and the widest part of the hip. So there are 3 key measurements. At this point it's worth considering you know your body the best. So if you know you're particularly tall or particularly short or particularly full busted or big hipped or small busted, any of the configurations that you find perhaps difficult when you buy clothes, think about that, and you might want to take extra measurements. So say you are tall or short, you could take a measurement between the nape and the waist, also the length if you're doing a garment, a skirt or a dress or trousers. That's something else to consider. So consider the style that you're making and what measurements are relevant to it. Like I said, there's no point doing a hip measurement, or there's no point doing a bust measurement if you're making a skirt. It's not relevant. So measure up the things that are going to be important in that style, and then we look at where that fits in. So at this point it's good to have just made a few notes, either on the pattern or on a piece of paper, what your measurements are. And if you're particularly lucky, you might just fit into one column, so your bust, waist and hip might be exactly as the pattern is. So the chances are, if you then made the garment up, it would fit perfectly. But you also might have a situation where you've got a bust from one column, a waist from another column, so you might be a 10 bust, a 12 waist and hip. So at that point you'll know that you need to really potentially make a few alterations to the pattern to get a good fit. But again, that's going to depend on the style. So if you were making this and your waist and hip are bigger, it's really the bust that's going to determine the fit on this top. So you'd probably be fine with making no alterations at all to something like that. So that would be a good option to go for. So then you've got the garment measurement chart. So with this is where the amount of ease is added to the pattern to create that style. So imagine if you were to make a garment up that measured exactly these measurements, it would be skin tight, which just would be, you wouldn't be able to move if it was a woven garment. So the ease is added to create the style that you're making. So say if it was this pattern, you might have maybe 20 odd centimetres bigger than your bust, because it's quite a loose fitting style, whereas something like this style might only be 5 or 6 centimetres bigger than your bust, but it will have some ease for movement. So these measurements can be another clue, again depending on the style. So this is for the Angie top that I'm wearing, which is actually a semi-fitted jersey top. So the ease on this is quite little, because we're relying on the stretch of the fabric to create the style. But what you can do is you can see what the actual garment measures. So say the 10, because this lady is actually measuring up to be a 10. So the 10 garment bust measurement is 92. So if I put the tape measure around her at 92, we can see how much ease that has. And you could also measure one of your existing garments. Say you've got a top with a similar type of fit to this, you could actually measure up the garment and see how that compares. So it'll give you another clue to how the fit's going to be. So you're sort of building up a picture of what your garment's going to be like. So that's how this is going to be if we made up the 10. We could also look at making up the 8, and you can see now we're getting into the realms of it being very, very fitted if we went down to the size 8. And if we went up to the size 12, you'd have really quite a loose fit for a t-shirt, so, semi-fitted t-shirt. So all of those things can kind of add up to get your bigger picture. And then the other thing that I would recommend doing if you are worried about the fit is making a toile, which is a mock-up garment, just to see the fit and also to see the style, and if you like it you can try it on. So if you make that in something that's a fabric that's either inexpensive, or calico's the classic one we use for woven garments, but obviously if you're making a jersey garment you've got to make it in a jersey fabric. You really need to have something similar to what you're actually going to make it in to get the true fit. So but yeah, hopefully that's helpful. The last thing I quickly want to mention is stretch versus woven. They are two different things. If you know that you really want to make more stretch garments than woven, it's worth learning more about stretch garments, going down that route, because the rules are slightly different. You might find if you're making a stretch garment you've actually got negative ease, which means it's relying on the stretch and it's going to be a really tight fitting garment. Say leggings would have negative ease because they're so tight fitting, the measurement will actually be smaller than your body measurement, so that they do become tight. But again, you know, it's just learning more about the measurements and how that works, really for you and for the garment. So I hope you found that useful, and if you'd like to see more videos please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and hopefully see you again soon.